It was a warm summer night when I, Evan, decided to take a drive out for a night cruise. I've always enjoyed the tranquility the night offered, the absence of traffic, and the cool breeze on my face. I invited my friend Kevin to join me. He hesitated for a moment but eventually agreed, saying he too needed to clear his head. We took an old highway, famous for its true horror stories. Many claimed the roadway was haunted, but I never took those stories seriously. To me, they were just tales to spook night travelers. Kevin, on the other hand, seemed a bit more concerned. He mentioned several terrifying experiences others had on that very road. Driving into the night, the landscape appeared even gloomier. The tall, twisted trees cast long, sinister shadows across the road. The radio played softly, a stark contrast to the mounting tension in the car. Everything seemed peaceful until we spotted what looked like a shadow by the roadside. It resembled a human figure, but it stood still, like a statue. Kevin told me not to stop, so I drove past it with a racing heart. After a few miles, something even stranger happened. It seemed we were stuck in a loop, driving the same stretch of road over and over. I recognized a rusty old sign and a fallen tree multiple times. Kevin was pale, cold sweat on his brow, and I started to feel something truly odd was happening. The sense of being trapped in a nightmare was undeniable. We kept driving, hoping it was just an illusion caused by the darkness and fatigue. But then we heard an ear-piercing scream coming from the forest beside the road. We abruptly stopped the car, trying to make sense of what was happening. It felt like the highway itself was trying to swallow us whole. The haunted roadway was showcasing its true terror. That scream marked the beginning of our nightmare. Kevin looked at me with wide eyes and said, almost whispering, "Evan, we need to get out of here. Now." I agreed without hesitation, but when I tried to start the car, it just wouldn't turn on. Panic started to set in. We were stranded on that haunted highway, with the night terror intensifying by the second. I stepped out to check the engine, while Kevin kept a lookout. The darkness seemed to swallow everything around us, making it impossible to see beyond a few meters. Suddenly, I spotted another strange figure in the distance, but this time, it was slowly moving towards us. A chill ran down my spine. Kevin yelled for me to get back in the car, but before I could respond, we heard that terrifying scream again, louder and closer this time. We jumped into the car and locked the doors, trying to think of an escape. The shadow kept approaching, and the feeling of being watched was undeniable. "Turn on the flashlight," Kevin suggested, and I pointed the beam at the figure. To our horror, we saw a distorted human shape, as if it were constantly moving without ever getting closer. Fear paralyzed us for a few seconds, but we knew we had to act. Suddenly, the car started by itself, as if an invisible force wanted us to continue our scary journey. Without hesitation, I hit the accelerator, trying to escape that horrible sight. The figure disappeared into the darkness, but the sense of being trapped in an endless cycle remained. We passed the same fallen tree and old rusty sign again and again. It was as if the road was holding us captive. Kevin started to pray, something I'd never seen him do before. He begged for this to end, for us to get out alive. I could only focus on the road, searching for an exit, any exit. The night dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. We were living one of those true scary stories we'd heard so often but never believed could be real. As we drove, the sense of repetition started to drive us mad. Every turn, every shadow, it all felt like deja vu. Kevin was close to panicking, and I struggled to maintain my composure. Suddenly, we spotted a faint light ahead, like a beacon of hope in the midst of our scary trip. Without thinking twice, I drove towards the light, hoping it would lead us out of this nightmare. The light guided us to a small cabin by the roadside. We decided to stop and check it out, hoping to find someone who could help. We stepped out of the car and knocked on the cabin door. An old man answered, his face weathered and tired. "What are you doing on this road at this hour?" he asked, his voice a mix of concern and resignation. We told him about our night drives and how we seemed trapped on the highway. The old man looked at us gravely and said, "You're not the first ones to experience this. This road has an old history, dating back to when a group of travelers mysteriously disappeared during its construction. Ever since, the road has had its peculiarities." His words were chilling, but there was a ring of truth to them. I asked if there was a way out, and the old man shook his head. "The only way to escape is to find the marker that signals the end of the road. But be careful, the road will try to divert you." We thanked him and returned to the car with newfound hope, but also a fresh dose of fear. We had to find that marker. We drove with renewed determination, ignoring the shadows and screams that continued to haunt us. After several miles, we finally spotted something different. An old wooden sign, barely visible in the darkness. that read, "End of the road." Kevin almost wept with relief, and I accelerated towards it, hoping it would set us free. As we passed the sign, something strange happened. The darkness seemed to slowly lift, and the sense of repetition vanished. We were on a different stretch of road, one we'd never been on before. The night terror began to fade, and a strange calm settled over us. It was as if the road had finally let us go. The road ahead seemed peaceful, almost welcoming, in contrast to the horror we just endured. Kevin and I exchanged glances, both of us speechless at the relief and disbelief we felt. It appeared we had escaped the nightmare. We drove in silence for a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. In the distance, we spotted the lights of a town. It was a sign that we were finally returning to civilization. I pulled over at a small gas station to refuel and get some fresh air. The attendant, a middle-aged man with a curious look, asked where we'd come from. We told him about the highway, and he nodded in understanding. "You're not the first ones to have terrifying experiences on that road," he said. "Many speak of apparitions, screams, and the feeling of being trapped, driving in circles. It's one of the most famous haunted highways in the region. Some say it's cursed, but no one knows for sure." His words confirmed we weren't crazy. We had indeed lived through one of those true scary stories we'd always heard about. As we refueled the car, Kevin and I discussed our next steps. We decided we would never again take that road at night. The experience had been a true night terror, something neither of us wanted to relive. We finished refueling and got back on the road, now with a new destination in mind, home. The return trip was uneventful. The fear and tension began to fade, replaced by exhaustion. I was still bewildered by everything that had happened, but the relief of being safe was immense. When we finally arrived home, it felt like a weight had been lifted from our shoulders. Days later, we still thought about that night. The images of the strange figures, the screams, and the endless loop remained in our minds. We talked to other friends and learned that many people avoided that highway due to similar terrifying experiences. It was a lesson learned the hard way. While the night had been one of the scariest of our lives, it also gave us a new understanding of true horror stories. Sometimes, haunted roadways and terrifying experiences aren't just urban legends, but realities that challenge our comprehension. Our night cruises would never be the same again. I was driving at night, alone, on one of those highways rumored to be haunted, crossing through the country's interior. It was late, and the silence was only broken by the sound of my tires on the asphalt. My name is Nathan, and I've always been a skeptic when it comes to the veracity of these scary stories. That night, my goal was simple: to get home after a business trip. Little did I know that I was about to experience one of the most intense, terrifying encounters of my life. The highway was deserted. The tall, dark trees alongside the road seemed to hide ancient secrets. As I drove, a sharp scream pierced the tranquility of the night. I braked abruptly, my heart pounding. I looked around but saw nothing. I felt a chill down my spine, a primal fear I had never experienced before. I decided to move on, but soon after, I heard children's voices coming from the woods beside the road. I'm not the kind of person who ignores calls for help. I pulled over, got out, and grabbed a baseball bat from the trunk, something I always carry for emergencies. The screams continued, more distant now, but clear enough to guide me. I ventured into the woods, feeling the damp ground beneath my feet and the cold night air enveloping me. With each step, I felt myself moving further away from the road, into a labyrinth of trees and darkness. As I advanced, the screams seemed to move away, as if the source was constantly shifting. I started running, my breath becoming heavy and irregular. I saw shadows darting between the trees, quick movements that I couldn't identify. My heart raced, and the whispers all around intensified the sense of being lured into a trap. The forest closed in on me, and I began to doubt I would find my way out. Finally, I realized I was lost. The screams had ceased, replaced by an oppressive silence. I was sweaty and tired, my mind a whirlwind of terrifying thoughts. I decided to turn back, the only source of safety I had. But in the darkness, everything looked different. The trees loomed larger, and every sound was an invisible threat. Despair started to set in, but I kept walking, determined to escape the nightmare. My breath was ragged as I tried to orient myself in the darkness. Every time I thought I was heading in the right direction, I felt more lost. It was as if the forest had a life of its own, conspiring to keep me away from the road. The skepticism that had always accompanied me was quickly fading, giving way to visceral fear. The screams had stopped, but the whispers persisted, murmuring unintelligible words that seemed to mock my situation. I was forced to stop several times, trying to hear some familiar sound that would guide me back. In the dim light, I saw quick shadows, always at the corner of my vision, disappearing when I tried to focus on them. Suddenly, a new sound broke the silence. Footsteps behind me. I spun around, the baseball bat tight in my hands, ready to defend myself. But there was no one, just the darkness and the motionless trees. A chill ran down my spine. I began to doubt my own sanity. "Nathan, what are you doing here?" I thought, regretting my decision to leave the car. I recalled all those night terror stories I had always scoffed at, and now it felt like I was living one of them. I decided the best course of action was to follow a straight line and try to find some reference point. With each step, the whispers seemed closer, more insistent. I avoided looking to the sides, afraid of what I might see. The forest felt like it was closing in on me, and the air grew heavier, almost suffocating. Then, a snap. Something moved between the trees, and for the first time, I clearly saw a figure, a human silhouette moving erratically. "Okay, this is too much," I shouted, more to myself than to whatever might be out there. The figure didn't respond, just continued to move between the shadows. I knew I had to get out of there, but every time I tried to move forward, it felt like I was being pulled deeper into the darkness. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard the most comforting sound, the distant rumble of an engine. It was my car, still running, a beacon of safety in the oppressive darkness. I gathered my last bit of strength and ran toward the sound, ignoring the whispers and shadows that pursued me. When I reached the car, my lungs were burning and my legs were weak. Without looking back, I quickly got in and locked the doors. The baseball bat fell to the floor as I struggled to catch my breath. I turned on the headlights, hoping to illuminate something, but saw only the immobile trees and the deserted road ahead. I didn't know what I had just experienced, but I knew I had to leave. I drove at high speed, not daring to look back. The night terror I faced in those woods would be forever etched in my memory. That night, the highway I had always traveled with skepticism showed me that some true horror stories are more real than we want to believe. I arrived home still trembling, and the sense of safety my home once offered now felt like a fragile consolation compared to what I had faced. The encounter on the haunted highway and in the woods left me with questions that might never be answered. But one thing was certain: I would never again underestimate the power of night terror stories, and above all, I would never again stop on a deserted road to investigate screams in the darkness. I went to bed that night, but sleep was slow to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw shadows and heard whispers. The experience was so real, so vivid, that it would be hard to explain to anyone who wasn't there. Now, I understand the weight of true scary stories that others share, and I have my own to add to the list. The night was moonless, and the stars seemed to hide behind dark clouds. I, Sebastian, and my girlfriend, Madison, were on our way back from a relaxing weekend at a mountain cabin. It was about 10:30 in the evening, and the road was deserted, surrounded by dense woods stretching for miles. The car radio played a soft melody, barely audible, as we chatted about the pleasant moments we had shared. Suddenly, the car started to shake, and I realized something was wrong. I pulled over and got out to check. One of the tires was flat. "Damn," I muttered, trying not to alarm Madison. She looked at me with concern as I opened the trunk to retrieve the spare tire and the necessary tools. The dashboard clock read 10:55 in the evening when I began to change the tire. Madison stayed in the car, using her phone's flashlight to help me see. The deserted road felt even more oppressive with the darkness surrounding us. The dense woods that enveloped us seemed to absorb all sound, creating an unsettling silence. As I worked, a muffled sound broke the silence. It seemed to come from somewhere within the woods, followed by a loud, frightening scream, as if a large animal was in agony. My heart raced, and I felt a chill down my spine. Madison looked at me with wide eyes, clearly scared. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes, I did," I replied, trying to stay calm. It must be some wild animal, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. The silence returned, but now it carried a sense of impending danger. I hurried to finish changing the tire, but curiosity and concern got the better of me. The clock now read 11:30 at night, and I felt compelled to investigate. Someone might be in need of help. "Stay in the car and lock the doors. I'll take a look," I told Madison, who reluctantly agreed. I grabbed a flashlight and ventured a few meters into the woods, guided by the need to understand what was going on. As I walked, the sound of my footsteps on the dry leaves seemed amplified in the night's quiet. With each step, my heart pounded harder, and I prayed I wouldn't find anything scary. The flashlight illuminated only a few meters ahead, and the darkness seemed to swallow everything around. The dense forest muffled sounds, and the silence was intimidating. As I listened, I heard the muffled sound again, now closer and clearly more disturbing. I continued walking, my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, I saw a faint light in the distance, as if candles were lit. I approached slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible. When I finally got close, I hid behind a tree. A man stood in the center of a circle formed by candles. He was shirtless, his body painted red, and his face blackened, giving him an even more sinister appearance. Next to him was a large bag, resembling a sleeping bag. The man stood still, motionless, as if in a trance. The air around him seemed to vibrate with a strange and disturbing energy. As I watched, the man suddenly opened his eyes and looked directly at me. His eyes shone with insane intensity, and he began to grind his teeth, emitting a sound reminiscent of a rabid dog's growl. Panic took over me, and I instinctively stepped back. But the man didn't remain still. He started moving towards me, his teeth still grinding, and his eyes fixed on mine. My body froze for a moment, but then adrenaline kicked in. I turned and ran back to the road, my legs moving faster than I ever thought possible. As I ran, I could hear the man's footsteps behind me, breaking twigs and dry leaves. Pure terror propelled me forward, and all I could think about was reaching the car and getting out of that cursed place as fast as I could. The distance to the car felt endless. Finally, I saw the car in the distance, with its headlights still on, and Madison anxiously waiting for me. I shouted for her to unlock the doors as I ran the last few meters. When I reached the car, I pulled the door open and jumped in. "Drive! Now!" I yelled to Madison, who, scared out of her wits, didn't hesitate to step on the gas. As the car sped up, I looked back through the rearview mirror and saw the man standing at the edge of the road, his eyes still shining in the darkness. That gaze would haunt me for a long time, and I knew I would never forget that night. Madison drove at full speed down the deserted road, the car roaring as if fleeing from a nightmare. The dashboard clock read 12:10 in the morning, and the darkness around us felt even more oppressive. I told her everything I had seen, every terrifying detail, as my heart still raced. "What was that, Sebastian?" Madison asked, her voice shaking. "I don't know," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. "But we need to get out of here as fast as we can." The sound of the tires on the asphalt was the only noise besides our ragged breathing. The night silence had become even more unsettling, and every shadow on the road seemed to hide some danger. The landscape flew by, and the car's headlights illuminated just enough to keep us on track. Suddenly, a new sound broke the silence. It was a sharp, piercing scream, unlike anything we had ever heard before. It seemed to come from all directions at once, echoing along the road and through the woods surrounding us. Madison looked at me with sheer terror in her eyes, and I knew she was as frightened as I was. "Keep driving," I said, trying to sound firm. "Don't stop for anything." Madison nodded, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The clock read 12:40 in the morning, and every minute felt like an eternity. As we moved forward, the screams seemed to fade, but the sense of danger remained. The deserted road and dense woods seemed endless, and I began to doubt we would ever get out. Finally, after what felt like forever, we spotted the lights of a town in the distance. "There's the town," I said with a noticeable relief in my voice. "We're almost there." Madison kept driving without slowing down, determined to get us to safety. When we finally entered the town, the street lights enveloped us, bringing a sense of security. We stopped at a well-lit gas station, where we finally felt we could breathe easy. I got out of the car, my legs still trembling, and hugged Madison. "We're safe," I whispered, more to myself than to her. That night, as we settled into a small motel, we vowed never to travel that road at night again. The terror we experienced would haunt us forever, and we knew the deserted road and dense woods would never be the same for us. We had escaped, but the memory of that strange man and his screams would linger in our nightmares. Impossible not to question, who was that man? What was he doing there? Was it a satanic ritual? Unfortunately, we have no way of uncovering the truth, but it serves as a warning to be cautious when venturing into the woods at night. If you enjoyed the video you just watched, you won't want to miss this next one. Click now and I'll see you there.